Having now read the four-page response that the Department of Justice and Todd Blanche gave to Judge Emmett Sullivan in Katie Phang's case against the DOJ for violation of the Epstein File Transparency Act, having now read it, I don't think Judge Sullivan is going to be very happy. In fact, I think he's going to be quite upset. And I know what happens when federal judges in black robes get really upset with a party. And it's not going to be a good look for the Department of Justice or Todd Blanche, especially as we're in the midst of the Block the Blanche movement to stop him from being Attorney General. Who did he pick to file the paper? Who did he pick as his lawyer? The number 2 in the Department of Justice, Stan Woodward. And where did Stan Woodward come from? Stan Woodward came out of the woodwork to as a Jan 6th criminal defense lawyer and the lawyer for the co-defendant for Donald Trump in the Mar-a-Lago case, who was prosecuted by Jack Smith, a guy named Walt Nauta, who was Donald Trump's butler and body man. That's Stan Woodward. So I'm not surprised. I was never overly impressed with the lawyering of Stan Woodward, but now, given the opportunity to get the last word in to avoid sanctions by a federal judge, this ain't going to do it. We're going to post it in Legal AF Substack for you as well. I'm Michael Popok. You're here on MeidasTouch and Legal AF. Let's get to this breaking news story. How did we get here? Katie Phang, friend of ours and on the MeidasTouch Network, filed a lawsuit as a working journalist, claiming she had standing for informational harm, standing in for the rest of us, to argue that the Epstein File Transparency Act and the Administrative Procedures Act have been violated by Todd Blanche for his failure to turn over documents properly. You remember Todd Blanche. That's the guy that went begrudgingly to meet with victims and survivors of Epstein in order to try to get a vote from Senator Thom Tillis, and it backfired spectacularly on him. So that Todd Blanche has to answer the questions. There were 5 major categories of documents that needed to be addressed in their filings. 1, where is the email related to the sex torture video that was not properly produced in the production? Where are the handwritten notes concerning the FBI 302 witness statements concerning a woman who was a 13-year-old girl when she claims that Donald Trump sexually abused her? Where are the notes? Where's the redaction log that was required by the statute to be produced? You know, the 200,000 pages of missing documents, blacked out documents. Where is the log cataloging why they were blacked out and the basis for doing that? Where are the foreign language documents? None of this was produced at any time ever in the case. In fact, I had Katie Phang's lead lawyer.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
"30 minutes. That's how long Barack Obama spoke at the opening of his own presidential center in Chicago, a speech that would go on to be analyzed, dissected, and quoted across nearly every major outlet in the country for the following week. 30 minutes in front of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Joe Biden, Bruce Springsteen, and Christina Aguilera at a genuinely star-studded, once-in-a-generation event. And not once, not a single time, did he say the words Donald Trump. He didn't need to. Welcome to USA Press. Tonight we're walking through exactly what Obama actually said at that opening ceremony, line by line, because the criticism was sharper, precisely because of what it left unsaid. And then we're pivoting into something that broke just days later, a genuine diplomatic rupture between the United States and one of its closest European allies, over a claim Trump made about a world leader that she says he simply invented. Let's set the scene first, because the timing here matters. This was the week the far-right media machine had spent attacking both Obamas relentlessly. Days earlier, a fighter at Trump's own UFC 250 event had used his post-fight interview to falsely claim Michelle Obama is biologically male. A grotesque, baseless assertion delivered on a platform Trump himself was standing beside. And Trump, for his part, had reportedly called Barack Obama a stupid son of a bitch just days before the ceremony. That's the atmosphere the Obamas were walking into on June 18th. And their choice, according to multiple outlets covering the event, was dignity over confrontation. Barack Obama did not take the bait. He simply built his entire speech as an implicit rebuttal instead. It's worth dwelling a bit longer on exactly how ugly that specific week had actually gotten, because it makes Obama's composed response considerably more impressive by comparison. The UFC fighter's claim about Michelle Obama echoed the exact same kind of dehumanizing conspiracy theory this administration has trafficked in before, connecting directly to the racist ape video controversy we've documented in earlier reports. And Trump's reported "stupid son of a bitch" comment about Barack Obama wasn't some private aside caught on a hot mic. It was, by multiple accounts, delivered in a setting where its repetition to reporters was essentially guaranteed. That the Obamas walked into their own historic dedication ceremony carrying that exact backdrop and chose composed, values-based rhetoric over any direct retaliation is precisely why
Brendan Ballou, Public Integrity Project, on with me recently to talk about him seeking a $1,000 a day fine against Todd Blanche for those violations. Let's play a clip of Brendan and me. Is that in the judge's order?
It's incredible. I mean, and let me just back up 10 steps here. All of this is due to Katie Phang, having courage to bring this suit. And I think she was really smart and really focusing on some of these specific categories where, it's just so obvious that the government's breaking the law here. And I mean, I'll focus on the first one you mentioned, which, maybe doesn't sound super important, but it really is. And I think it goes to the Department of Justice's lawlessness right now, which is these foreign language documents. Again, like you said, this is a international investigation spanning multiple countries and decades. The Department of Justice just said categorically, we don't review documents that aren't in English, which is pretty shocking.
Which, by the way, just right there, I am sure that is not true in any other criminal investigation that they're involved with. Could you imagine in another international criminal case that they were investigating, they hit a box of documents that were in foreign language? Well, I can't figure it out.
I mean, it's like, think about, if you've worked in criminal law, like if you've got Brady obligations to disclose exculpatory information, that constitutional obligation doesn't go away just because it's in a different language. Like you risk losing your license with some of these sorts of things. Anyways, judge ordered them to produce these foreign language documents. And the Department of Justice's response was just incredible. They said, look, Judge, we told Congress that we weren't going to follow this part of the law, and Congress didn't do anything.
Seem to be okay with it.
And it's like, that's not how any law works. You just by saying that you're going to break the law doesn't make it legal. If I went to, if I told city council, hey, I'm going to rob this bodega next week, that doesn't make it legal when I do it. And it's the same reasoning here. So I was frankly kind of shocked that they even bothered to make that kind of argument. And I would be very surprised if it holds water with Judge Sullivan.
Now, Todd Blanche got all wrapped around his axle during his confirmation hearing as well. Let's just play one clip of him trying to answer why he's not meeting with Epstein survivors and about the production. Play the clip.
When President Trump signed the Epstein Transparency Act, the Department of Justice undertook a Herculean task to review millions and millions of potentially responsive files. We were required under the statute to do this expeditiously and very quickly. The Department of Justice did so. We reviewed over 6 million pages. Many of these pages were not responsive. And what I mean by that is we intentionally over-collected potentially responsive documents. So, for example, there was a case going on in Florida at the same time as the Jeffrey Epstein case involving another defendant named Epstein, having nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. When we collected materials, we collected everything involving Epstein, including the Epstein that had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. So the review of materials included non-responsive materials. The reviewers were qualified, experienced attorneys within the department and the FBI. They took pains to apply appropriate redactions. There were mistakes that were made, and so approximately 1% of the redactions had to be fixed after we released the Epstein files. Chairman, we had dozens of lawyers on call 24/7 whenever we learned that any victim's name had been improperly not redacted. We immediately took the document down. and fixed it as soon as we could. That doesn't excuse the mistakes of which I take responsibility, but it does mean that we tried to fix them. We complied with the act. It required us complying with judges' rules in New York, which required us to redact.
Way less for doing nothing.
Exactly.
Obama got a prize. He didn't even know what he got. He got elected, and they gave it to Obama for doing absolutely nothing but destroying our country. No, he was not a good president. The worst president was Sleepy Joe Biden, but Obama was not a good president.
Are you going to do something with the
They gave
Hezbollah?
him a prize. How many months after he won the election, then they gave him the Peace Prize, right?
It was right
Before he
afterwards.
was elected.
Are you going to take care of
My
the-
election was a much more important election.
By so many outlets covering the speech emphasized the restraint on display as much as the substance of what was actually said. Here's how he opened the substantive part of his remarks. He noted the approaching 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and reminded the crowd exactly what that document actually says. We are all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, he said. And in the newly independent United States, there will be no kings or lords, no serfs or subjects, but only citizens. Sit with that phrase for a second. No kings. This is a man who knows exactly what he's doing. He is speaking at the exact moment the No Kings protest movement has become one of the defining images of resistance to this administration. At the exact moment Trump has spent months referring to himself, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, in language that flirts with monarchical authority. Obama never mentioned the protests. He never mentioned Trump. He simply quoted America's own founding document back to the room and let the audience draw every single connection themselves. It's worth explaining the full significance of the No Kings reference for anyone unfamiliar with that specific protest movement, because Obama's word choice was doing precise work. The No Kings demonstrations emerged as a nationwide protest movement, specifically organized in response to what organizers characterized as this administration's authoritarian overreach, drawing crowds across dozens of American cities, united around the explicit argument that no single office, including the presidency, should be permitted to operate beyond constitutional constraint. For Obama to invoke almost the exact same language, no kings or lords, while discussing America's founding documents at his own dedication ceremony, without ever naming the protest movement or the president it was organized against, is precisely the kind of layered, deliberate rhetorical construction that generated so much subsequent political analysis. He kept going in that same register. These are the values and traditions I believe in, Obama said. They are not Republican or Democratic values. They are American values we can all share, regardless of party. Despite all of our differences, we can see each other and understand one another and make common cause together. That is not an attack. It is something more interesting. A deliberate refusal to fight on the same terrain Trump has built his entire second term around. Where Trump's rhetoric constantly divides the country into loyal supporters and dangerous enemies, Obama built his entire framing around shared values that transcend party, implicitly making the argument that
Back certain victims' names, even if the victim was also somebody who participated in criminal conduct. The judges in New York did not allow us to unredact those names. The other thing that we did, Chairman, is we made unredacted versions of the entire database available to everybody in this body. And we did that because of transparency. Remember, for 4 years, there wasn't a peep about Jeffrey Epstein. The Biden administration did nothing to be transparent about the Epstein case. We have been extraordinarily transparent in not only producing the records, but letting unredacted versions be available to anybody in this body. And if, after reviewing unredacted materials, a member had concerns about why something was redacted, they brought them to the department's attention, and we addressed that. So I want to make sure the American people know that this administration, when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, has been more transparent than any past administration, than Biden was or anybody else. And what we did is we complied with the law.
That led to a begrudging meeting the second day of the confirmation hearing between Todd Blanche and the survivors, but that went horribly. Here's what one of the survivors had to say about the meeting. Play the clip.
What is your sense of whether he had any shame for saying the day before the meeting that he would not meet with all of you, but when Mr. Tillis's vote became contingent on having the meeting, he was there? Did he say, well, I just said that because I didn't want to get tripped up, but I'm actually happy? Like, did he answer for saying he didn't want to meet with you guys 24 hours earlier?
No, that's actually a really good word that you brought up, Nicole, remorse. There was no remorse for any of the damage that was done. There was no remorse when we brought up, we've been trying to talk to you for 8 months, 9 months to tell you there are important files that should be looked at. There are plenty of investigative leads. There was no remorse in, even when Annie said, hey, I know that my sister's report is missing part of the pages. Will you do an investigation? He said no. There was not going to be any further investigations, and we had to go through proper channels now. We had to go back to the FBI, or we could talk to this other specialist. But basically, he wanted us to start all over again.
What does it make you feel about victims of child sex trafficking at the hands of powerful men today?
As an advocate, this is one of the things that is extremely frustrating, because getting any kind of accountability for any kind of sexual harm is already excruciatingly difficult. And you would think with 6 million files, by the way, he kept correcting us and saying 3 million files. He said there are only 3 million files, not 6 million files. With that volume of evidence, we feel if you can't find an investigative lead in that, then there's a problem with competence, or there's decisions being made. And so it's very discouraging, because right now, this man wants to be the Attorney General of the United States, and he doesn't know what to do with 6 million files. And how can anyone in this country ever feel safe that their case is going to be prosecuted properly, investigated properly, when all of this is happening with the world watching, Nicole? I mean,
So, Wisconsin, we do not need to see what an older, loonier Donald Trump looks like with no guardrails. America's ready to turn the page. We are ready for a better story, Wisconsin. We are ready for a President Kamala Harris. And the good news is Kamala Harris is ready for the job. This is a leader who has spent her life fighting on behalf of people who need a voice and need a champion. Somebody who was raised in a middle-class family, who actually worked at McDonald's when she was in college to pay her expenses. Didn't just pretend like he worked at McDonald's when it was closed.
Vision itself, not any specific policy disagreement, is the actual threat. It's worth understanding what the Obama Presidential Center actually represents before we go any further, because the venue itself carries real weight. Located on Chicago's South Side, the center is not simply a traditional presidential library in the older sense. It's designed as a working public institution and museum intended to serve the surrounding South Side community directly, while also housing the archival record of Obama's presidency. That a sitting former president would choose the dedication of this specific, community-rooted institution as the venue for his most pointed political commentary in years is itself meaningful. He wasn't speaking from a partisan stage or a campaign rally. He was speaking at what is explicitly designed to be a non-partisan civic institution, which makes the implicit criticism embedded in his remarks considerably harder to dismiss as simple political score settling. If you're finding this as sharp as we do, hit that like button right now and subscribe to USA Press, because we're going to walk through every layer of this speech and then pivot into something that just blew up an entire alliance. Stick with us. It's worth pausing on exactly who was actually sitting in that audience, because the guest list itself tells its own story. Former presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Joe Biden were all present, representing both parties and spanning decades of American political leadership. A genuine, rare gathering of the so-called President's Club that Obama's remarks were clearly designed to speak across, rather than purely to his own partisan coalition. Musicians Bruce Springsteen and Christina Aguilera performed at the event, adding a level of mainstream cultural star power that ensured the ceremony would be covered well beyond typical political news outlets. Notably absent, of course, was the current president, not invited, and his name never directly invoked by any speaker, according to CNN's own coverage of the event, which specifically noted his absence as its own kind of statement. Now let's get to the line that generated the most direct political heat, because Obama didn't stay entirely in the realm of abstract value.
Oh, what happens when no one's looking?
You know, it's funny. I used to think a pillowcase was, a pillowcase. Then I found Blissy, and I realized what I've been sleeping on, literally. Blissy's pillowcases are made from 22 Mame 6A grade 100% pure mulberry silk, and they're naturally cooling, breathable, hydrating, and much gentler on your skin and hair than satin or cotton. They help reduce frizz, breakage, sleep creases, and even help keep your skin looking healthier over time. They're dermatologist tested, machine washable, come in over 100 colors and designs, and it's no surprise they've sold more than 3 million pillowcases and have been featured by Vogue, Oprah Daily, and Good Morning America. I've been sleeping on it for a few weeks, and I can honestly say it just feels nicer than my old pillowcase. My hair's been a little smoother in the mornings, and I like how cool it stays through the night. Because you're a listener, Blissy is offering 60 nights risk-free, plus an additional 30% off when you shop at blissy.com/legalaf. That's BLISSY.com/legalaf, and use code legalaf to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you. So Judge Sullivan, back to our filing, gave the Todd Blanche one more shot to respond. And here we go. It's about, 3.5 pages. And listen, I wasn't that impressed with the lawyering and the mind of Stan Woodward to begin with, but I'm certainly not now. This is what they say, and I'll give you the translation. Page 2. Whereas the defendant's response to the order to show cause, that's the Trump side, set forth rational arguments, the plaintiff's response, that's Katie's side, is filled with hyperbolic rhetoric seeking to impose punitive sanctions on the department for availing itself of the process the court afforded it. No, the court told you either produce the documents or show cause, good faith basis, supported by facts, usually by an affidavit, sworn testimony, why you couldn't produce it. To this day, Todd Blanche and anybody in his Department of Justice refuses to provide sworn testimony to a judge. If I were on the other side of that judge's order, I would have provided affidavits and declarations, but of course they didn't do it then, and they're not even doing it now. We're just getting naked argument of counsel. This is what they say. The court has not ordered the immediate production of documents. Rather, the court has ordered the department to show cause if it declines to do so. They make it sound like it's just an offer, like an aspirational goal of the judge instead of a order by fiat of a federal judge. On page 2, they say, and far from declaring that the department will not abide by a court order, the department, meaning the Department of Justice, has accepted the court's offer. Oh, bully you've accepted the court's offer. That sounds fantastic. We'll meet you for tea at 4:00. Are you kidding me? That wasn't an offer. That was a requirement. It's going to piss off the judge. That's all I'm telling you now. They don't like the $1,000.
What I cannot understand is why anybody would think that Donald Trump will shake things up in a way that is good for you, Pennsylvania. I don't understand that. Because there is absolutely no evidence that this man thinks about anybody but himself. I've said it before. Donald Trump is a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he wrote.
He made a specific, pointed institutional critique. We've got a set of institutions that have fallen victim to the siren song of everything is about money, and everything is about attention, and everything is about fame, and everything is about getting over, he said, again, without naming a single person or company. But meanwhile, there are just a lot of people out here doing the right thing and raising their families and taking care of people. Think about how precisely that criticism lands, given everything we've documented across this entire channel. The $16 million Paramount settlement, the Colbert cancellation, the Kimmel suspension, the media companies choosing capitulation over confrontation at nearly every turn this year. Obama is describing, in the most general possible terms, the exact specific pattern of institutional self-dealing we've traced across dozens of individual stories, and he's doing it in front of the CEOs and media figures who are almost certainly sitting in that very audience. It's worth connecting this specific institutional critique back to something else we've documented, because it demonstrates just how consistent Trump's own fixation on his predecessor has become. Newsweek's own reporting has tracked Trump repeatedly invoking Obama's name in recent months, including during criticism over the renovation of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, a dispute in which Trump managed to work references to his predecessor into commentary about a literal pool renovation. That same reporting traced the origin of this fixation all the way back to 2011, when Trump became one of the leading public voices behind the birther conspiracy theory, questioning Obama's citizenship, and noted that references to Obama actually spiked during Trump's first term, at times appearing dozens of times within a single month across speeches and public remarks. Obama's own assessment of this pattern, "I obviously have a room in his head," delivered on the All the Smoke podcast just days before this speech, gives you the full arc, a fixation stretching back a decade and a half, now culminating in a president who still cannot stop invoking his predecessor even while discussing swimming pool maintenance. Let's talk about the moment that made even hardened political reporters pause, because it revealed something genuinely human underneath all the rhetoric. Discussing Michelle's own remarks at the
A day fine either, and they end it this way on page 3. Again, it's not really a 5-page. It's really a 3-page response signed by Stan Woodward. Ultimately, the department will continue to comply with all applicable disclosure laws, but the department also needs to be afforded the ability to seek appellate review of preliminary injunction orders it believes to be in error. Okay, as soon as you get sanctioned, you can go take your appeal. For these reasons, any order of the court should not include contempt or sanctions relief, should include language recognizing the order as appealable, and should stay the effective date to allow the government to seek appellate review. Here we go. In fact, when I had Brendan Ballou, Katie Fang's lawyer, on, he's like, I don't even know why they haven't appealed yet. They haven't appealed because they know they have a losing argument. That's the answer. They know that if they file the appeal and they get a bad response, which is likely, they lose sort of the political cover and the talking point. So they're going to stretch this out. Well, Judge, we'd like to appeal, but we're waiting on you, and there's all these procedures, and it's really hard. It's not really hard. You could appeal now. You could have appealed when the judge initially entered his order in favor of Katie Fang, plain and simple. Just to remind you what Katie wrote in her filing, and in seeking what she's seeking, she basically says that what they're doing is the opposite of transparency. I mean, they like to talk about, we're the most transparent Department of Justice about Epstein ever. Of course, they don't abide by anything. They don't supply an affidavit. Here on page 8 of Katie's filing, they said, in his opposition to plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction, the Attorney General never once argued that any of the specific documents that were requested by plaintiff would reveal victim information, for instance. Then, hours after the court granted the motion, by the way, that's the point where they could have taken the appeal, the government issued a public statement attacking the court. Judge Sullivan's perverse interpretation appears to be focused on driving misleading headlines. This judge is suggesting DOJ violate the law by unredacting victim names who, as the department has always explained, sadly became co-conspirators. It does a disservice to this court, Katie writes, and to the victims in this matter by making the argument in the press and not briefing until the Attorney General had already lost. And again, you see in the new filing, they don't attack the judge. They wouldn't dare. No, they leave that to their cowardness outside the courtroom in extrajudicial statements. We're going to follow this closely. I'm going to grab Katie Fang and ask her to join our show, maybe even tonight on The Intersection, which is on Tuesday nights, 8 p.m., my show on the Midas Touch Network. Tonight, special guest, Mark Elias, talking about your vote and the 13 times he successfully defeated the Trump administration, 13-0, to try to steal voter data to weaponize the mechanisms around voter protection and try to suppress the vote. You're not going to want to miss my interview with Mark Elias tonight. Until my next report, take a moment, come over to the Legal AF YouTube channel. early voting has started. We're trying to get to 2 million subscribers by election day, by midterm.
So you've got a president who replaces career prosecutors with loyalists who will do his bidding, and now he's telling them to hand over millions of taxpayer dollars that he had to pay in expenses for previously violating the law. We've got a commander-in-chief who has fired decorated military officers because he thinks they might be more loyal to the Constitution than they are to him. No, don't boo. He's deployed the National Guard in American cities and claimed to be stopping crime waves that don't actually exist. We've got masked ICE agents pulling in unmarked vans and grabbing people off the streets, including U.S. citizens. Don't boo, vote. Grabbing them on the suspicion that they don't look like real Americans. We've got Health and Human Services Secretary who opposes proven science and then peddles quack medicine. We've got a top White House aide who calls Democrats.
Ceremony, Obama said, "She wouldn't let me see her speech. She knew she was going to mess me up, and she did it anyway. But she's always made me better, and I could not be more grateful." And then, in a moment of real vulnerability, rare for a former president speaking at his own commemorative center, he pointed to something he'd kept on his actual Oval Office desk, a plaque reading, "Hard things are hard." Of course, we did not accomplish everything we set out to do, he said. No administration does. Some of the exhibits reflect unfinished business. In some cases, my own shortcomings and mistakes. That kind of public self-accounting. A former president standing at the dedication of his own museum and volunteering his own failures rather than only his triumphs, stands in about as stark a contrast as you could possibly construct against an administration that has, across every single controversy we've documented on this channel, reached instinctively for blame redirection rather than accountability. It's also worth noting that Michelle Obama delivered her own rousing remarks at that same ceremony, according to Rolling Stone's coverage of the event, including her own not-so-subtle jabs at the current administration alongside her husband's. That both members of the former First Family used this exact platform to deliver pointed, values-based criticism, coordinated in spirit if not in specific content, given that Barack Obama admitted he hadn't even been allowed to preview her remarks in advance, reinforces that this was a genuinely shared, deliberate messaging moment for the entire family, not simply one man's individual choice of rhetoric. Now let's talk about the broader significance, the New Republic's own analysis assigned to this speech, because it deserves real attention. Writer Greg Sargent called it a blistering indictment of the 45th and 47th president, all without mentioning the words Donald Trump, and connected it directly to something else worth flagging. Obama's own past criticism of Trump for mocking immigrant New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani over mild criticisms of the United States, with Trump insisting Mamdani should simply be grateful for his own admission to the country and self-censor accordingly.
Donald Trump is panicking as it has become official. Donald Trump has the worst approval rating in United States history, worse than Richard Nixon before Nixon resigned. Let me share with you the results of some of the latest polling right now that has Donald Trump as the least popular president in U.S. history. Here's what Harry Enten had to say earlier. Let's play it.
Good. No, the cake is getting baked, and what's being baked ain't daisies, I'll tell you that much. I mean, just take a look here. Okay, Trump's not approving. You know, a lot of stuff has happened over the last few months. Has any of that really lifted Trump from record lows for these given pollsters or second record lows? Not really. I mean, just take a look here. The Washington Post, his all-time lowest was minus 25 points back in April in terms of his net approval rating. It's approval minus disapproval. Now it's the second worst, tied for the second worst of all time at minus 24 points. CNBC was at his second lowest level at minus 18 points. And now he's at the record low for him in CNBC, minus 19 points. When you put it together, what essentially is going on is there are a lot of events in the world, but this cake as we get closer and closer to the midterm elections is starting to look at least a little bit baked here.
All right. I mean, I suppose you could say if you're Republican, the good news is it's not getting worse, but you actually need it to be getting better.
Correct. These are horrible numbers, Johnny B.
So put it in historical perspective.
Yeah, just how horrible are these numbers? I mean, it's the worst this century for a president at this point in his second term when you look at an average of the CNBC and Washington Post polls. I mean, we're talking about right here, the average of CNBC and Washington Post, minus 22 points. Barack Obama was underwater, but not anywhere near this level. He was at minus 8. And George W. Bush, in the middle of the Iraq War, when that was going south, he was at minus 20 points. So at this point, Donald John Trump is, in fact, holding the record for the lowest net approval rating for a president in a second term at this point in the second term of any president in the 21st century.
And if you think that's bad.
And if you think this is bad, what is driving this number? It's independence, baby. It's independence. Look, all time worst at this point in a second term net approval rating among independents, Donald John Trump. This segment has been about baking. He takes the cake at minus 45 points among independents, even worse than Richard Milhouse Nixon, who was about to leave office because of Watergate, who had previously held the record at minus 37 points, and the aforementioned George W. Bush at minus 31 points. Donald John Trump, the worst ever rating, net approval rating with independents at this point in a second term.
Now let's bring out some of the receipts as well, so you see what this MAGA Republican cult is all about. MAGA Republican Congress members making their rounds on the MAGA Republican influencer podcasts like the Benny Johnson Show. And you've got MAGA Republican Congress members like Brandon Gill saying, we're just so wealthy in the United States and everybody's thriving and everything's just so amazing here. Maybe for you, but most Americans are suffering and struggling and can't afford anything. Let's play this clip.
It has. And it's one thing whenever you live in America, especially if you grow up in America, it's really easy to get used to the level of affluence that we take for granted every day. That we drive in massive pickup trucks or SUVs everywhere we go that guzzle gas, that we go to a supermarket and it's filled with, 5,000 different types of cheeses on one aisle, and then 600 different types of milk that you can buy on the next aisle. And you have this unbelievable variety of things that you can buy that's just normal for us.
Then on Benny Johnson, they bring on another MAGA Republican cult member, Congress member Darrell Issa. And Darrell Issa blames, this is what they're talking about today, by the way, blaming Nancy Pelosi's husband for nearly being murdered.
The whole Democratic Party, domestic extremists. And then we've got some poor labor economists who got fired for accurately reporting bad job numbers that Trump didn't like. It's like every day is Halloween, except it's all tricks and no treats.
Sargent's framing was precise. Obama's speech functions as a rebuttal to the entire Vance MAGA nationalist worldview, not through direct confrontation, but by articulating, patiently and specifically, what the actual alternative vision of American identity looks like. It's worth briefly explaining the Mamdani episode Sargent referenced, because it strengthens the connection between Obama's speech and the broader nationalism debate it was implicitly addressing. Zohran Mamdani, elected as New York City's mayor, had made relatively mild public criticisms of certain aspects of American policy, drawing an outsized response from Trump, who suggested Mamdani, himself a naturalized citizen, should simply be grateful for his own admission to the country rather than voice any criticism at all. That specific framing, demanding gratitude and silence from immigrants as the price of belonging, is precisely the kind of exclusionary nationalism Obama's own speech implicitly rejected by insisting that American identity rests on shared values available to all of us, regardless of background or party. Now here's where we make the turn, because everything you just heard happened at a ceremony in Chicago weeks ago. What broke just days after that speech is a genuinely serious diplomatic rupture, and it involves one of America's closest remaining European allies, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, a right-wing leader who was, until recently, considered one of Trump's strongest and most reliable allies anywhere on the world stage, the only European leader who attended his 2025 inauguration in person, posted an extraordinary video rebuke directly at the President of the United States, The Trigger, an interview Trump gave to Italy's La 7 TV channel, in which he described a moment from the G7 summit where he and Meloni had been filmed sitting closely together on a small sofa, deep in conversation. Trump's characterization of that moment, translated from the interview: "She's probably happy I talked to her. I didn't have to talk to her. She begged me to take a picture with her. She wanted a picture with me so badly. I wouldn't have taken it, but I felt sorry for her." It's worth describing exactly what the actual footage from the G7 summit showed, because it directly contradicts Trump's own characterization of the moment. Video from the summit in Evian-les-Bains, France showed Trump and Meloni seated side by side on a small sofa, engaged in what multiple outlets described as close, animated, mutual conversation. Nothing in the footage itself suggested any one-sided pursuit of attention or a photograph. That the underlying video record so clearly contradicts the version Trump gave to Last 7 TV is precisely what made Meloni's team feel confident enough to respond with such direct
by a lunatic Trump supporter. That's what they're talking about today. Let's play this clip right here.
What's going on here?
Well, look, he
finally caught a charge.
Paul Pelosi is a member of the Bohemian Club. He needs to go to the Bohemian Grove where other people drive for you. You can be drunk as can be, and everything's fine. The fact is, the man has serious problems. We saw it in that very dubious circumstances where he let somebody in and ended up with his head knocked. We've seen it in multiple events in Porsches and other cars that he owns, and his constant drinking.
Then you have MAGA Republican senators attacking Dr. Fauci. That's part of their position and platform right now as well. Here's MAGA Republican senator. Let's play it.
Thanks to Tulsi Gabbard, she unleashed a treasure trove of documents right as she was leaving that really confirm everything that my informants have told me, that Anthony Fauci not only funded the research in Wuhan, he led the charge for covering it up. Look, this makes Watergate look like a situation where some kids broke a window at recess and they're trying to hide that from their teacher. This cover up was exponential in so many ways as well. And then he covered up whistleblowers. Somehow he was able to suppress whistleblowers as well. And that's why we need a special investigation.
And what's Donald Trump talking about right now? This is how Donald Trump is dealing with the affordability crisis. As Americans can't afford groceries or gas, as he's escalated this never-ending catastrophic and unlawful war in Iran, he's making posts like this. Wonderful news. I've just been informed that Giant Eagle, a great American grocery company, will be lowering prices by a lot across more than 300 products this summer through Labor Day to help hardworking American families. Giant Eagle, like Walmart, is stepping up in a big, bold way to answer my call to lower costs for working families. You're trying to take credit for different supermarkets and convenience stores offering coupons and doing sales, and you're trying to say that that demonstrates your dedication to affordability when inflation is surging, when you said you were going to make things cheaper on day one, but things are far less affordable, and hoisting us into this global economic catastrophe as well, and the economic catastrophe at home, as crude oil only has maybe a few weeks to even be left. Like,
I complained plenty about Fox News, but you never heard me threaten to shut them down. Can't just put walls up all around America. Walls don't keep out threats like terrorism or disease. But I am here to tell you that even if you don't agree with me or Democrats on policy, even if you believe in more libertarian economic theories, even if you are an evangelical and our position on certain social issues is a bridge too far, even if you think my assessment of immigration is mistaken and the Democrats aren't serious enough about immigration enforcement, I'm here to tell you that you should still be concerned with our current
public force rather than simply absorbing the comment quietly, as allied governments have often done with previous Trump remarks they found similarly objectionable. Meloni's response, delivered in a video posted directly to X, in Italian, was about as sharp a rebuke as one head of state has delivered against another allied nation's leader in recent memory. "There is one thing he must remember," she said. "Neither I nor Italy ever beg." She called Trump's account completely fabricated and said she was astounded by the comments. And then she delivered the line that should genuinely concern anyone tracking the state of American alliances. "I do not know why the President of the United States behaves this way toward his allies. It is certainly not the first time this has happened." Read that sentence again. The leader of a nation that has been one of America's most dependable partners is telling you, on the record, that this specific kind of casual, invented disrespect toward an ally is a pattern, not an isolated incident. The fallout escalated fast. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani abruptly cancelled a planned visit to the United States, writing on X that the serious and offensive words of President Trump towards Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni offend the whole of Italy. And in a detail that tells you just how far this rupture reached inside Meloni's own inner circle, Giovanbattista Fazzolari, a close political ally who typically avoids the media spotlight entirely, broke his usual silence to say, "It is unclear whether out of intent or ineptitude, Trump is wrecking the historic relations between the United States and Europe." That is not a political opponent speaking. That is someone from inside Meloni's own trusted circle, a person who by all accounts prefers to stay out of public view, feeling compelled to say, on the record, that Trump might be actively damaging transatlantic relations, either through deliberate strategy or simple incompetence, and admitting he genuinely isn't sure which. It's worth emphasizing just how unusual this rupture is given Meloni's own document.
We're already at a tank bottom portion, but soon there'll just be no crude oil left in the U.S. supply. We're already at the lowest inventory in 45 years. And what else is Donald Trump posting about and talking about? Things like this. This was his post. "Benjamin Netanyahu will not be arrested in any way, shape, or form while in the United States of America. He's fighting against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which recently killed 52,000 innocent protesters and has spent the last 40 years killing American soldiers and others. The only ones that should be arrested are the people that led Iran into this unprecedented spiral of death and destruction, something that should have been dealt with years ago by previous presidents. Donald J. Trump." Interesting words, vortex and spiral of death and destruction, because I think that's how a lot of Americans feel about what Trump has done to the United States, as Doge ripped apart our government and disbanded critical programs, as Trump ripped away healthcare for millions of Americans, as Donald Trump's anti-vax derangement has resulted in viruses and diseases spreading throughout the United States. And as Donald Trump has gotten the United States into catastrophic, never-ending wars that nobody wants to be involved in, except Donald Trump and his neocon warmongers, who certainly put America last, that's for sure. Oh, and then Donald Trump posted this: "Every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for the killing many times over. The directive has been passed on to Secretary of War Hegseth, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Daniel Kaine, and every leader in the military, Donald J. Trump." So Trump escalates his catastrophic war, pretends and claims that Iran doesn't have missiles, doesn't have defense, doesn't have a military, that Iran is basically broken and begging for a deal, which we know is false. We run out of munitions. We don't have the necessary Patriot interceptors or THAAD interceptors to stop the Iranian response to Donald Trump's escalation of the war in the various Arab nations where there are U.S. military bases. Donald Trump has our service members basically just sitting there as targets without any really way to defend them. There have been dozens and dozens of other injuries, which Donald Trump is covering up. Oh, and might I add, while all of this is taking place, the Trump regime is covering up the Epstein files as well, and that they continue to cover up child sex trafficking rings. And that's what the United States is now known for throughout the world. The country that covers up for the child pedos. I mean, how utterly disgusting. You know, I find interesting as well. I'm not sure if you saw the story out of New Hampshire. John Sununu, MAGA Republican who's running for the Senate seat there, that Washington posted this expose. It was good reporting. So Sununu is in the Epstein files with Jeffrey Epstein saying that John Sununu has great stories to tell. And Sununu was at this speaking of the Middle East, this conference in Doha, Qatar, when Jeffrey Epstein was there as well, or one of Epstein's people were going there, and Epstein's like, Sununu's got great stories to tell. He's got a lot of great stories to tell. And Sununu said, I've never been to Doha before. And then he had to admit to the Washington Post he had been to Doha to that conference. Well, Epstein said, Sununu, I mean, everywhere you look, it's just utter psychotic madness, disgusting behavior. I want
to go down his golden escalator 9 years ago. You've got the tweets in all caps, the ranting and the raving about crazy conspiracy theories. You have the 2-hour speeches, word salad, just, it's like Fidel Castro. Just on and on. Constant attempts to sell you stuff. Who does that? Selling you gold sneakers and a $100,000 watch and most recently a Trump Bible.
Political history, because it makes the rebuke considerably more significant than an ordinary diplomatic disagreement. Meloni built her international reputation specifically as one of the few major European leaders willing to align closely with Trump, campaigning on distinctly nationalist, right-wing politics that made her a natural ideological ally rather than a predictable critic. Her attendance at Trump's 2025 inauguration as the only European head of government present was itself a genuinely notable diplomatic gesture, one that signaled a level of personal investment in the relationship considerably beyond ordinary transactional alliance politics. For that specific relationship, built over years of careful ideological alignment, to rupture this publicly over a fabricated account of a photograph tells you the underlying frustration had likely been building for considerably longer than this single interview suggests. Let's connect this directly to what makes the timing so remarkable, because this diplomatic rupture landed only days after the G7 summit itself had appeared, according to multiple outlets, to show signs of a more stable US-Italy relationship following earlier tensions over the Iran war. Meloni had been carefully managing a genuinely difficult balancing act, remaining broadly aligned with Trump while facing mounting domestic political pressure at home over the widening Middle East conflict. This entirely self-inflicted controversy over a photograph that footage clearly showed as a mutual, close conversation between two seated leaders rather than any one-sided pursuit undid weeks of careful diplomatic management in a single interview. Let me give you my full analysis of why this specific rupture matters so much more than a typical Trump gaffe, because I think it connects directly back to everything Obama was gesturing toward in his own speech without ever naming names. Obama's entire framing at the Presidential Center was built around institutions and relationships defined by shared values, mutual respect, and common cause. The exact opposite of a foreign policy built around one man's need to characterize every single interaction, even with genuine allies, in terms of who begged whom for attention. Meloni's line, "He treats his enemies better than he treats allied nations," is not simply Italian outrage. It is a precise diagnosis of exactly the pattern this channel has documented across dozens of individual stories. A worldview where relationships exist purely to be won or lost.
To bring in right now the Democrat running for the Senate seat in New Hampshire, Chris Pappas. He's currently a member of Congress. He's running for that Senate seat. Let's bring in my interview with Democratic Congress member Chris Pappas, running for that Senate seat that's now vacant because Senator Shaheen is now vacating that seat. This is a big race, folks. Let's bring in my interview with Congress member Chris Pappas. Democratic Congress member from New Hampshire, running for the Senate seat right there, the open Senate seat, running against John Sununu out there. In many ways, people like John Sununu, they want to try to push themselves to the voters of New Hampshire as they're moderates and they're, nothing to see here. I'm just going to be fighting for you. But to me, it's really the wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, we've seen that also with his brother, Chris Sununu. And, it's a big issue because they're going to go out there, say we're going to be moderate, but they're going to rubber stamp this dangerous agenda, in my view, that's really hurt the people. And they go out there. It's the same shtick that we see for the elections, try to get elected, and then boom, in power, screw the people. Talk to us about what's going on.
Yeah. No, thanks, Ben. It's great to see you. And look, New Hampshire has a key Senate race this year. And We won't be able to take back the Senate majority if we don't win it. The race is in the margin of error in every single poll that comes out. One had it a 1-point margin just a couple of weeks ago. So we're taking this seriously. We've got an opponent with a big name that everyone in New Hampshire knows. Even people beyond New Hampshire know it. But the fact is, a vote for John Sununu is a vote for Donald Trump. He supports Trump's policies. He stands with Trump in this campaign. He supports the tariffs, the cuts to healthcare, the tax breaks for the rich and biggest corporations, and everything that's making our country less well off, less safe right now. He stands with Trump on the war, which we know is setting back our national security, our ability to work with our partners and allies to keep our country safe, and is raising gas prices and energy costs for Americans at home. So that's the stakes in this election. It's whether we want someone who's going to be a yes man for this president, who is incredibly reckless, is ignoring the will of the American people, or whether we're going to put the needs of working families and our small businesses first.
And should still want to see a restoration of honesty and decency and lawfulness in our government. It should not be Democratic or Republican. It should not be a partisan issue to say that we do not pressure the Attorney General or the FBI to use the criminal justice system as a cudgel to punish our political opponents. Or to explicitly call on the Attorney General to protect members of our own party from prosecution because an election happens to be coming up. I'm not making that up. That's not hypothetical. It shouldn't be Democratic or Republican to say that we don't threaten the freedom of the press because
lost, where even a warm conversation with an ally gets rewritten after the fact into a story about who needed whom more. Let me give you my prediction section now, clearly labeled. Prediction 1. Expect this rupture with Italy to have real, lasting consequences for US-EU coordination, specifically on Iran policy, because Meloni had been one of the few European leaders still actively engaged in balancing that relationship. And this entirely self-inflicted controversy removes much of her domestic political capital to continue doing so, at a moment when that coordination arguably matters more than at any point since the war began. Prediction 2. Watch for Trump to escalate rather than walk back his account of the G7 moment, because that has been the consistent pattern across every similar dispute we've documented on this channel. Doubling down rather than issuing a clarifying correction, regardless of what the underlying video footage actually shows. Prediction 3, and this is the one that connects both halves of tonight's report. Expect Obama's specific rhetorical strategy, never naming Trump directly, building the critique entirely through implication and shared values, to become an increasingly common approach among Democratic figures heading into the midterms, precisely because it has proven, across this exact speech, to generate more sustained media analysis and cultural staying power than a direct, nameable attack ever could. It's worth expanding on what Tajani's cancelled visit actually represents in practical diplomatic terms, because a foreign minister abruptly cancelling a planned trip is not a symbolic gesture. It typically reflects real, substantive items that were meant to be discussed and negotiated during that visit, now left unresolved. Given the ongoing coordination needs between the US and its European allies, specifically around Iran policy, energy markets, and NATO alliance commitments, all threads we've documented extensively across this channel, a cancelled foreign minister visit at this exact moment carries genuine operational consequences beyond simple diplomatic messaging. Whatever specific agenda items Tajani was traveling to Washington to address, they now sit unresolved. At precisely the moment sustained US-European coordination matters most, given the broader
by fighting for a fairer economy, standing up for what's right in Washington, and actually working to translate the will of the voters into solutions around healthcare, childcare, housing, all the issues that people are talking about right now. So yeah, my opponent might have a big name, but he stands with Donald Trump. He stands on the wrong side of history. And this is a moment where we've got to take back the government for the people and work in a direction where we can make people's lives better. And that's what's at stake in our race.
You and I have been talking for a very long time. I had you on in early 2025, later in 2025. And so we've kind of been tracking the progress of, or the lack thereof under the Trump regime of what's been going on in New Hampshire. And it feels there, like many places in this country, like almost the entire country, you know, we're really in a dire situation, and there's really not the right political language in normal political times to, I think, fully even address the existential nature of this moment. And sometimes, you know, you can be accused of being hyperbolic to raise the red flag, but I find it interesting that when we truly have a threat, I believe, to the very functioning of our country, of our democracy, what your opponent and others are basically, you know, running on, they co-opt that message, and then they basically run on the same thing, that it's an existential threat and that's how they're running. I just, voters are inundated with so much. The people are just trying to get by right now on a day-to-day basis, and the other side knows that. And so, what's this moment? What are you hearing when you're traveling, you know, the state and hearing just from the people? Because what I hear from people is this is not normal bad. This is like really, really bad for the country right now.
People feel ignored fundamentally. They recognize that Donald Trump isn't acting in their best interest, that Republicans in Congress haven't put forward meaningful solutions.
He wants you to buy the Word of God, Donald Trump edition. Got his name right there next to Matthew and Luke. I mean, you could not make this stuff up. If you saw it on Saturday Night Live, you'd say, well, no, that's going too far. No, he's doing that. It's crazy. And the reason he does it is because all he cares about is his ego and his money and his status. He's not thinking about you.
Instability in the Middle East. Here is the deeper truth connecting everything we've covered tonight. Barack Obama stood in front of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Joe Biden and built an entire 30-minute speech around the idea that America's strength has always come from shared values that outlast any single administration, never once needing to say the current president's name to make his point land. Just days later, one of America's most loyal remaining European allies discovered exactly what happens when a relationship gets filtered entirely through one man's need to be the one who was begged, rather than the mutual respect Obama spent his entire speech describing. Different countries, different stages. Same underlying lesson about what happens when relationships stop being about common cause and start being only about who comes out on top. There is something worth sitting with in how differently these two stories were covered, even though they emerged from the exact same underlying pattern of behavior. Obama's speech generated thoughtful, extended analysis precisely because it required readers to do the work of connecting implication to reality themselves. Maloney's rebuke generated immediate, visceral headlines precisely because there was no ambiguity left to interpret. A fabricated quote, a video record that contradicted it, and a head of state willing to say so directly, in her own language, on her own terms. Together, they tell you something important about the two different ways institutions and individuals are currently choosing to respond to this administration, through patient, values-based contrast, or through direct, documented confrontation. Both approaches, this week, landed. This is USA Press. If tonight's report connected pieces you hadn't seen laid out together before, hit that like button right now. It costs you 1 second, and it puts this reporting in front of thousands more people who need to see how these stories actually fit together, especially given how differently a speech that never says a name tends to get covered compared to one that does. Subscribe to USA Press and turn on notifications, because between the fallout from the Maloney rupture, whatever comes next in the Obama-Trump rivalry, and the broader midterm season ahead, we are not going anywhere. Drop a comment and tell us, was no kings or hard things are hard the sharper line from Obama's speech? And do you think Maloney's rebuke signals a genuine, lasting shift in how European allies deal with this administration, or just a temporary flare-up that gets patched over? We want to hear where you land. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, the sharpest critique is often the one that never has to say your name.